He thought Claire Bennett would be the easiest laugh of the afternoon, but standing under those bright white dojo lights in suburban Denver, Derek Lawson had no idea he was about to lose something far more painful than his pride. Before we continue, where are you watching from? Drop your city or state in the comments below, and if you believe people should never be judged by appearances, hit like and subscribe. Stories like this remind us how quickly arrogance can collapse. Now, back to Claire Bennett. The polished floors of Lawson Elite Jiu-Jitsu Academy reflected the overhead lights like glass, and the room smelled of disinfectant, canvas mats, and quiet superiority. This was not the kind of gym where beginners felt welcome. Framed tournament medals lined the walls. Black belts stretched in clusters. Parents watched from leather benches near the entrance. Every movement inside that building carried one message. If you did not belong, everyone would know it. At exactly 4:10 that Thursday afternoon, the front door opened, and in stepped a woman no one bothered to take seriously. Claire Bennett was 39, average height, with pale skin, soft brown hair tied into a loose ponytail, and a faded blue GI that looked at least 10 years old. Her belt was a washed-out light gray, impossible to identify at first glance, which only made a few younger students exchange amused looks. She carried a small duffel bag over one shoulder and paused politely at the front desk, as if she were entering a dentist's office rather than one of the most competitive martial arts academies in the county. Her eyes moved calmly across the room. No swagger, no nerves, just stillness. Derek Lawson noticed her immediately, and the corner of his mouth lifted in the kind of smile that never meant kindness. At 44, Derek had built his reputation on intimidation as much as instruction. Thick shoulders, cropped blonde hair, black belt embroidered with gold thread, and the practiced confidence of a man who enjoyed being the most important person in every room. His afternoon advanced class was invitation only, reserved for tournament trainees and senior members. So when he saw Claire, standing there looking like a suburban mom who had wandered in after grocery shopping, he felt irritation first, then opportunity. He wiped his hands on a towel, strolled toward the desk, and gave her a once-over that lasted just a second too long. "Can I help you?" he asked, though his tone suggested the opposite. Claire offered a small, respectful smile. "Yes, sir. I called earlier. I was told drop-ins were allowed for the advanced fundamentals session." Derek blinked once, then chuckled softly. Several nearby students heard him and looked over. "Advanced fundamentals," he repeated, savoring the contradiction as if she had told a joke. "That's a tough room." Claire nodded. "I understand." But Derek could already tell she did not understand anything, or at least that was what he wanted everyone else to believe. He turned halfway toward the class and raised his voice just enough. "Looks like we've got a brave volunteer today." A few black belts smirked. One teenage student covered his mouth to hide a laugh. Claire remained exactly where she was, hands folded loosely over her duffel strap, expression unreadable. Derek studied her plain face and quiet posture and made a decision that would haunt him before the hour was over. He was going to use her as an example, use her as entertainment, use her to remind his students what happened when someone stepped onto his mat without looking the part. He motioned toward the center of the dojo. "Go ahead and get changed, ma'am," he said, smiling wider now. "Let's see what you can do." And as Claire Bennett walked toward the locker room with slow measured steps, a hush of amused anticipation followed her, because every person in that academy believed they were about to witness a harmless embarrassment. None of them knew they were actually watching the first seconds of Derek Lawson's downfall. When Claire emerged from the locker room 3 minutes later, the low murmur around the dojo sharpened into open amusement. Her faded blue GI hung loosely at the shoulders, softened by years of washing, and her belt looked so worn that one of the younger competitors whispered, "Is that even a real rank?" Two women near the stretching wall exchanged glances and smiled behind their hands. Claire heard all of it. She simply bent down near the edge of the mat, removed her plain white sneakers, and placed them neatly beside her duffel bag with the same careful precision someone might use arranging books on a shelf. There was something almost old-fashioned about the way she moved, unhurried, self-contained, never asking for attention and never reacting to the fact that every eye in the room was now on her. Derek Lawson clapped his hands once, gathering the class. "Circle up," he called. 20 students formed a half ring around the center mat, black belts in front, blue, and purple belts behind them. Everyone suddenly more interested than they had been during warm-ups. Parents lifted their heads from their phones behind the glass partition. Even the receptionist leaned around the desk. Derek lived for moments like this. He fed on group attention the way some men fed on applause. He stepped beside Claire, towering over her by nearly half a foot, and addressed the class with theatrical patience. Our guest says she wanted advanced fundamentals. A few chuckles slipped out. Derek nodded toward Claire as if introducing a novelty act. Tell us your name. Claire folded her hands lightly in front of her. Claire Bennett. And how long have you been training, Claire? Derek asked. It sounded innocent, but the room already sensed the trap. Claire hesitated for a fraction of a second. On and off for a while. Derek tilted his head. On and off for a while, he repeated, drawing out each word until several students laughed louder. That usually means YouTube videos and a free trial coupon. More laughter. Claire did not smile. She did not defend herself. She simply kept her eyes level, not on Derek's face, but somewhere near his shoulder, as though she had already learned that looking directly at arrogant men only encouraged them. Derek paced in a slow circle around her. Do you compete? He asked. No, sir, Claire answered. Teach? No, sir. Any tournament medals? No, sir. Derek stopped and looked at the class with exaggerated disappointment. Well, this is getting less impressive by the second. The students laughed again, this time with confidence, because permission had been granted. Claire had officially become the harmless outsider. Derek pointed toward the wall where the Academy's framed championship photos hung in polished rows. See those? He asked her. National qualifiers. Regional champions. Pan-American medalists. This room is not a beginner fitness center. People come here to be sharpened. He paused, then added with a grin that drew instant smirks, not to do suburban stress relief. Claire gave one small nod. I understand. But there was something in the calmness of her reply that irritated Derek more than any protest could have. He wanted embarrassment. He wanted flustered excuses. He wanted the shaky laugh of someone realizing they were out of place. Instead, she stood there as still as a fence post in winter. So he decided to press harder. All right, he said loudly, turning to the class. Let us make this educational. Since Claire here wants advanced fundamentals, we will start with break-fall demonstrations. Several black belts exchanged amused looks. Break-falls were basic, but under Derek's supervision, they often became public lessons in clumsiness for new students. He motioned to the exact center of the mat, the one place impossible to avoid every set of eyes. Step in. Claire obeyed without a word. Derek folded his arms and smiled toward the ring of students gathering tighter. Let us see, he said, whether our brave volunteer can handle something simple. And in that polished, silent dojo, with 20 strangers waiting for her to fail, Claire Bennett took her place on the center mat, as if she had walked into this humiliation before and already knew exactly how it ended. Derek Lawson stepped onto the mat beside Claire with the relaxed swagger of a man certain the next few minutes belonged entirely to him. He bent his knees slightly, motioned with one hand, and addressed the students as though he were beginning a comedy routine. Breakfalls are simple, he announced. Unless, of course, you freeze up. A few students laughed on cue. Claire stood facing him, hands at her sides, shoulders loose, breathing so steady it almost looked detached. Derek demonstrated the first backward fall with exaggerated smoothness, slapping the mat sharply with both palms and popping back to his feet. Your turn, he said. Claire nodded once. She lowered herself, rolled backward, and landed with quiet control, neither awkward nor impressive, just clean. Derek frowned almost invisibly. He had expected a stumble. Again, he said. This time he added more speed to the instruction, making her repeat the motion across the center line while students watched from all angles. Claire completed it the same way each time, neat and economical, never flashy, never flustered. There was no obvious failure for the class to enjoy, and Derek could feel the first tiny crack in his planned spectacle. So he changed tactics. Fine, he said with a shrug. Maybe she can fall down. Congratulations. The sarcasm drew another wave of chuckles. He gestured for one of his senior blue belts, a broad-shouldered 20-year-old named Trevor Mills, to step forward. Trevor jogged in eagerly, sensing he had been invited into the joke. Derek placed a hand on Trevor's shoulder. Now we test movement pressure. He looked at Claire. Trevor is going to guide you through a simple balance drill. Nothing difficult. Just try not to topple over. Claire gave a polite nod. Trevor grinned, perhaps not cruel by nature, but young enough to enjoy whatever the room rewarded. He circled Claire once, lightly touching her forearm, nudging her stance, forcing her to pivot. Derek narrated every tiny adjustment with mock concern. Watch the feet, Claire. Those are important. Laughter. Do not lean like that, Claire. Gravity is undefeated. More laughter. Trevor added a playful shoulder feint that made two purple belts snicker. Claire corrected her footing instantly, but Derek spoke over it before anyone could notice. There we go. Survival mode. The class was warming to the performance now. One parent behind the glass smiled awkwardly, not sure whether this was instruction or entertainment. Claire remained silent, but something subtle had changed. Her eyes no longer drifted around the room. They had narrowed into still focus. Not angry. Not embarrassed. Measured. Derek, too intoxicated by his audience, failed to read it. He stepped closer. Tell me something, Claire, he said, folding his arms. Why advanced class? Most first-timers start with mobility drills and beginner etiquette. Claire looked at him for a moment before answering. I did not come for etiquette. The sentence was quiet, almost too quiet to register, but those nearest the mat heard it. Trevor blinked. One black belt in the front row raised an eyebrow. Derek let out a short laugh, louder than necessary. Well, confidence. That is refreshing. He turned toward the students. Did everyone hear that? Smiles returned. The room leaned back into mockery. Derek pointed toward Trevor. All right then. Let us make it a little more realistic. Trevor, light contact pressure. Claire, defend your space if you can. Trevor bounced once on the balls of his feet, clearly enjoying the spotlight. Claire adjusted nothing except the fingers of her left hand, slowly curling and uncurling them as though checking circulation. Derek noticed the motion and mistook it for nerves. Do not worry, he said with a grin. He is gentle. The students laughed again, but the laughter felt thinner now, stretched over a silence no one could quite explain. Claire lifted her chin a fraction of an inch. Trevor stepped forward, and for the first time since entering Lawson Elite Jiu-Jitsu Academy, Claire Bennett no longer looked like a woman trying to fit in. She looked like someone finally deciding whether the lesson had gone on long enough. Trevor Mills stepped in with the loose confidence of a young athlete who had never once been told to doubt himself. He was 6 feet tall, broad through the chest, and wore his blue belt like it was a preview of greatness. The front row students shifted forward, eager now, because this was no longer a simple drill. This was the part where the outsider would finally look foolish. Derek Lawson folded his arms and smiled like a man about to collect on a promise. Just movement pressure, he reminded Trevor, though his tone carried a different message entirely. Trevor nodded and began circling Claire in a slow arc, reaching in lightly. At first, tapping her shoulder, touching her sleeve, forcing her to reposition. Claire moved with small conservative steps, giving ground but never crossing her feet, never letting her balance rise too high. To the untrained eye, she looked hesitant. To anyone who truly understood mat control, she looked annoyingly efficient. Derek saw only what fed his own narrative. You are stiff, Claire, he called out. Relax. This is not a tax audit. The room laughed. Trevor added a playful foot fake, and one of the black belts behind him whispered, She is done. Claire said nothing. Her breathing remained slow, almost invisible. Trevor reached again, this time with more assertiveness, pressing into her upper frame and guiding her backward 3 quick steps. A couple of students clapped softly as though the inevitable collapse had begun. Derek grinned. There we go. Welcome to real pressure. Trevor moved in once more, trying a faster directional change, expecting Claire to stumble. Instead, she pivoted just enough to let his momentum pass across her hip line. It was subtle, so subtle that half the room missed it, but Trevor blinked in confusion when he found himself a foot farther to the side than intended. Derek immediately spoke over the moment. Good recovery, Trevor. Do not let beginners bait you into awkward angles. Trevor gave a sheepish laugh and reset. Claire lowered her eyes for one brief second, not in submission, but in thought, as though she were deciding how much longer to tolerate being treated like a prop. Derek, hungry to keep the class entertained, raised the stakes again. All right, he said loudly. Trevor, mild grip engagement. That drew a murmur. Grip engagement meant the drill had officially crossed from demonstration into controlled sparring. Trevor nodded with visible enthusiasm. He reached for Claire's sleeve and collar in one fluid motion, expecting another easy sequence of pushing her off-center. His fingers barely settled before Claire shifted. Not dramatically, not aggressively. Just one clean turn of the wrist, one slight drop of weight, one step that erased the line Trevor thought he owned. Trevor's shoulders tilted. His footing scrambled. For half a second, he looked less like a confident blue belt and more like a man trying to understand why the floor had moved. A hush touched the nearest students. Trevor quickly recovered and laughed to hide the surprise. Lucky angle, someone muttered from the wall. Derek heard the uncertainty in the room and instantly pushed back against it. Again, he snapped. Trevor came in faster this time, eager to restore the script. He reached, pressed, shifted, attempted to guide Claire into a shallow off-balance pattern Derek used on new students every week. But Claire absorbed the motion with maddening calm. Her hands stayed low. Her elbows stayed close. Her feet whispered across the mat in short, invisible adjustments that made Trevor work harder with every second. The playful grin began fading from his face. He tugged once more, then twice, and each time Claire redirected just enough to make him look clumsy without ever appearing to attack. The students stopped laughing. Even the receptionist at the desk leaned farther around the corner. Derek felt the energy changing and did not like it. This was no longer his joke unfolding on schedule. Trevor stepped back, cheeks flushed, and forced another smile, but his eyes had lost their easy confidence. Claire lifted her gaze and looked at him directly for the first time. It was not a threatening look. That somehow made it worse. It was the look of a woman measuring whether she had been patient long enough. Derek opened his mouth to regain control of the room, but before he could speak, Trevor lunged forward one more time, determined to prove he still had command. And Claire Bennett finally moved. Trevor's final rush lasted less than a heartbeat before the entire rhythm of the room changed. Claire shifted one step to her left, not hurried, not dramatic, simply precise. Her right hand guided his sleeve downward while her hips turned just enough to remove the line he thought he controlled. Trevor's momentum carried him forward into empty space, and suddenly his posture collapsed into confusion. Before anyone fully understood what they were seeing, Claire had redirected his balance, settled him harmlessly onto the mat, and stepped back with both hands lowered as if she had merely adjusted a chair. Trevor stared upward in stunned disbelief. No crash, no wild struggle, just a clean technical reversal so efficient it looked almost impolite. The dojo went silent. Derek Lawson's grin vanished first. Then the whispers stopped. Then even the parents behind the glass leaned closer, sensing they had just missed something important. Trevor blinked twice, pushed himself upright, and looked at Claire with a red flush creeping up his neck. I slipped, he muttered quickly. One of the purple belts laughed nervously, eager to rescue the room's old script, but the laugh died almost immediately because no one else joined in. Claire remained exactly where she was, feet planted, shoulders relaxed, face unreadable. She did not celebrate. She did not smirk. She did not even look at Trevor after he stood. That absence of reaction unsettled the room more than any boast could have. Derek stepped forward at once, clapping sharply to reclaim authority. Again, he said, too fast. Trevor got careless. Trevor nodded with forced eagerness, embarrassed now, pride pushing harder than judgment. He reset his grip, inhaled, and came at Claire with noticeably more effort. This time Claire did not wait as long. Trevor touched her sleeve, tried to angle inward, and within a second found himself turned offline again, his knees touching the mat as Claire redirected him with the same calm economy, never yanking, never striking, simply making his own pressure work against him. A collective inhale swept across the students. Someone whispered, "What was that?" Trevor rose more slowly this time. His smile was gone. Derek's jaw tightened. He could feel control leaking out of his class one stare at a time. The black belts in front were no longer amused. They were studying Claire, really studying her, the way experienced grapplers do when something does not fit the story they were told. Derek pointed at Trevor as if dismissing an employee. "Step out." Trevor obeyed, avoiding eye contact with everyone. Derek turned toward the ring of students and forced a chuckle that landed flat. Apparently our guest has seen a move or two. No one laughed. Claire stood in the center mat with the same composed posture, but now the visual had changed completely. She no longer looked like a misplaced suburban mother. She looked like the only person in the building whose pulse had not changed. Derek hated that realization the second it formed. So he did what arrogant men always do when embarrassment taps them on the shoulder. He doubled down. "Mason," he barked. From the front row, Mason Cole stepped forward. Mason was 28, a seasoned black belt, former regional medalist, thick forearms, calm face, and the kind of mat reputation students mentioned in lowered voices. If Trevor had been part of the joke, Mason was the cleanup crew. A murmur passed through the class. Derek folded his arms again, though his fingers now pressed harder into his sleeves. "Let us remove the beginner misunderstandings," he said. Mason gave Claire a curt nod, not mocking, just professionally dismissive, the nod of a man who assumed this would take 5 seconds. Claire returned the nod. Her eyes lifted slightly, and for the first time there was the faintest shift in her expression, not fear, not excitement, but recognition, as if the real class had only now begun. Mason rolled his shoulders once and stepped onto the center line. Around them, 20 students leaned inward, every trace of laughter erased. Derek swallowed his irritation and forced confidence back into his voice. "Controlled engagement," he announced. But his own words sounded thinner than before. Because somewhere beneath the fluorescent lights, beneath the framed medals, beneath the polished certainty that had ruled Lawson Elite Jiu-Jitsu Academy all afternoon, a new thought had entered the room, quiet and unwelcome. What if Claire Bennett was not surviving this humiliation at all? What if she had been allowing it? Mason Cole did not smile when he stepped onto the mat. That alone told everyone this was no longer entertainment. The easy laughter that had filled Lawson Elite Jiu-Jitsu Academy 10 minutes earlier had drained away, replaced by the faint squeak of bare feet shifting against canvas and the hum of fluorescent lights overhead. Mason was not Trevor. He was patient, decorated, and technically respected enough that Derek Lawson often used him to demonstrate discipline under pressure. If anyone could restore the natural order of the room, it was him. Derek pointed between them. "Simple grip exchange," he said, forcing casualness into his tone. "Let us see whether that last sequence was luck or repetition." Mason inclined his head once and extended his hands. Claire mirrored him. Their fingers met at the sleeves and collar in a controlled connection so ordinary it almost looked ceremonial. But in jiu-jitsu, ordinary contact is where truth begins, and every experienced student watching knew that now. Mason tested first pressure, a measured pull followed by a slight angle change. Claire absorbed it. Mason pushed forward, trying to capture inside control. Claire rotated just enough to deny it. Mason shifted left, then right, increasing tempo in subtle increments. Claire followed every transition as if she had read them before he made them. No wasted motion. No nervous retreat. No beginner stiffness. Just quiet, maddening accuracy. A whisper moved through the front row. Derek heard it and felt his stomach tighten. Mason's eyes narrowed. He tried a faster snap on the sleeve, expecting some delayed reaction, some visible gap, some proof that this woman was surviving on instinct rather than understanding. Instead, Claire's foot landed half an inch outside his line, her elbow sealed inward, and his leverage disappeared before it fully formed. Mason reset. Then he tried again, this time adding shoulder pressure and a deeper grip to force commitment. Claire yielded 1 inch, then redirected 2. Mason's center drifted. His posture lifted awkwardly. In one smooth exchange, Claire turned his own adjustment into a controlled imbalance, and Mason dropped to one knee with a palm on the mat to steady himself. The room inhaled as one. Mason looked up immediately, surprised not because he had touched the mat, but because he had not seen the pathway there. He stood, now fully serious. Derek's folded arms tightened across his chest. "Continue," he ordered. Mason nodded, cheeks darkening. This time there was no trace of courtesy. He circled wider, stepped in cleaner, and engaged with full technical intent. Claire met him in silence. Their grips connected. Broke. Reconnected. Mason attempted to trap the sleeve. Claire cleared it. Mason angled for outside control. Claire dissolved the angle before it matured. To the casual observer, it looked like a blur of small hand fighting. To everyone with experience, it looked like something deeply uncomfortable for Derek Lawson. Mason Cole was being systematically read. Then came the moment that changed the atmosphere entirely. Mason committed to a forward pressure sequence he had used in regional competition for years, one of his safest entries, one students in that academy had seen succeed dozens of times. Claire turned with him, lowered her weight, guided his arm across center, and with one elegant redirection settled him harmlessly but unmistakably flat onto his back. Mason blinked at the ceiling. No one moved. The silence was so complete that the receptionist dropped her pen, and the tiny plastic click echoed like a gunshot. Claire stepped away and waited. Mason sat up slowly, breathing harder now, disbelief written plainly across his face. He did not protest. He did not claim he slipped. He simply stared at Claire Bennett as if trying to place a song he had heard years ago. One of the black belts near the wall whispered, "Who is she?" Derek heard that too, and this time, he could not speak over it. His face had gone pale beneath the confidence. Because instructors can survive a beginner's lucky moment. They can survive a student's temporary embarrassment. What they cannot survive is recognition spreading through their own room that the stranger in the faded blue GI understands the art better than the people teaching it. Derek took one step forward, then another. His jaw set. His pride had now crossed the point where delegation could save him. If control was going to be recovered, he would have to recover it himself. Derek Lawson stopped at the edge of the center mat and stared at Claire Bennett with the brittle smile of a man trying not to let humiliation show through his teeth. Around him, his own students had gone. Motionless. Mason Cole was still rising from the floor behind Claire, but no one was looking at Mason anymore. Every eye was now fixed on Derek, waiting to see whether the king of this polished suburban dojo would step forward or step back. Men like Derek never step back when witnesses are present. He rolled his shoulders once, loosened his neck, and walked onto the mat with deliberate calm. "Enough warm-up games," he said, his voice lower now, stripped of the joking tone that had carried him through the first half hour. "Let us have a proper technical exchange." No one answered. Claire turned to face him. She did not look triumphant. She did not look nervous. She looked mildly tired, as if this afternoon had become longer than she intended. Derek hated that expression more than open defiance. He reached for her sleeve. "You have decent fundamentals," he said, speaking quietly enough that only the front row could hear. "But this room is not impressed by parlor tricks." Claire's eyes lifted to his. "Then perhaps this room should pay closer attention." The sentence landed like cold water. One black belt near the wall inhaled sharply. Derek's jaw flexed. He snapped into grip contact immediately. No theatrics now, no audience patter, just instructor pride wrapped in polished aggression. He pulled hard on the collar, angled his hips, and attempted to drive Claire into a familiar pressure lane he had used to dominate students for years. Claire moved one step, then another, not retreating, mapping. Derek increased force, trying to rush the exchange before the room could witness hesitation. Claire's sleeve hand rotated inward. His collar grip lost depth. He reset and tried to capture her outside line. She dissolved it. He changed tempo again, faster this time, forcing contact, trying to make experience look overwhelming. But every adjustment Derek made seemed to arrive 1 second too late, as if Claire had already visited the future and found his next decision waiting there. The students watched in complete silence. Derek's breathing sharpened. He reached for a stronger upper frame control, attempting to pin her posture and create a visible advantage. Claire lowered her center, redirected his wrist, and slipped off the line with a movement so small several parents behind the glass missed it entirely. Yet the result was immediate and unmistakable. Derek staggered half a step sideways. A murmur rippled through the black belts. Derek recovered, cheeks coloring. He attacked again, this time abandoning subtlety and trying to overwhelm through pressure. Claire met him with the same infuriating composure. Grip, redirect, turn. Derek's base broke for the briefest second, and in that second Claire used nothing more than timing and placement to guide him downward into an involuntary kneeling catch. His hand slapped the mat to steady himself. The room froze. Derek Lawson, owner of Lawson Elite Jiu-Jitsu Academy, was on one knee in front of the woman he had introduced as a joke. No one laughed. No one breathed loudly enough to be heard. Derek looked up slowly, and what terrified him most was not the position. It was Claire's face. She was not gloating. She was waiting the way a teacher waits for a student to recognize the lesson. Derek stood too quickly, anger flushing through his neck. Again, he barked, though no one had asked him to continue. He lunged back into contact, pride now doing what skill could no longer control. Claire pivoted with him, absorbed the surge, and with one final technical redirection, sent his balance spilling harmlessly but decisively onto the canvas. Derek landed flat on his back, staring up at the fluorescent lights that suddenly looked much brighter than before. The academy went dead silent. Mason lowered his eyes. Trevor's mouth hung open. Even the receptionist had both hands over her lips. Claire stepped back, folded her hands lightly in front of her belt, and said the 7 words that shattered whatever authority Derek still had left in that room. Discipline begins where ego finally ends. For 3 full seconds, no one inside Lawson Elite Jiu-Jitsu Academy moved. Derek Lawson remained on the mat, staring upward as if the ceiling itself had betrayed him. His chest rose sharply, his hands pressed against the canvas. But the worst part was not the position. It was the silence around him. The same. Students who had laughed when Claire Bennett walked in now stood frozen in a wide ring, their faces stripped clean of amusement. Some looked confused. Some looked embarrassed. A few looked almost ashamed. Because in one controlled exchange, the room had watched something far more unsettling than an instructor losing balance. They had watched arrogance lose credibility. Derek pushed himself upright slowly, aware that every motion now belonged to witnesses. His blonde hair had fallen loose across his forehead. The black belt embroidered with gold thread no longer looked like a symbol of command. It looked expensive and suddenly very fragile. He stood, cleared his throat, and glanced around for some thread of normalcy to grab, some student smile, some nervous chuckle, some sign that this could still be brushed off as an instructional anomaly. There was none. Mason Cole kept his eyes on the floor. Trevor Mills folded his arms tightly, no longer eager to be noticed. Even the parents behind the glass partition had abandoned their phones entirely. Claire remained at the center, breathing evenly, hands resting near the knot of her faded belt, her old blue GI somehow commanding more respect than every framed medal on the wall. Derek forced a dry laugh. Interesting, he said, but the word landed dead. He swallowed and tried again. You clearly have some prior exposure. Claire said nothing. Derek hated that too. Silence from a defeated person is manageable. Silence from a composed person is devastating. One of the younger black belts near the wall suddenly stepped closer, squinting at Claire's face with growing recognition. His name was Ethan Parker, a tournament competitor in his early 20s who spent too many nights online studying archived matches and technical seminars. He looked from Claire to her worn belt, then back to her hands. His eyebrows climbed. Wait, he said softly. No one answered, but every head turned toward him. Ethan took another step, eyes widening now. No way. Derek snapped, what? Ethan pointed, not rudely, just in disbelief. Coach, that is Claire Bennett. Derek's jaw tightened. Yes, we know her name. Ethan shook his head quickly. No, not just Claire Bennett. He swallowed. Claire Bennett from the Colorado Invitational Finals. 3-time state submission champion. She disappeared like 8 years ago. The words fell into the dojo like dropped steel. Trevor looked at Mason. Mason looked up sharply at Claire. One parent behind the glass mouthed. Oh my God. Derek stared at Ethan, then at Claire, then back again, as if refusing to process a sentence that explained the last 20 minutes too perfectly. Ethan continued, his voice half stunned, half reverent. My old coach used to show clips of her pressure transitions. Said she was one of the cleanest technical grapplers in the state before she quit competition. A hush deeper than the last one settled over the academy. Suddenly, every tiny detail that had seemed laughable about Claire made different sense. The faded GI, the calm posture, the refusal to react, the efficient movements. She had not looked nervous because she had not been threatened. She had looked patient because she had been waiting for everyone else to catch up. Derek felt heat crawl into his face, but no comeback came. None existed. The room was no longer his to command. It belonged to the truth. Claire bent calmly, adjusted one fold of her sleeve, and finally spoke, her voice quiet enough that everyone leaned in to hear it. I came because your website said this academy teaches humility through discipline. Her eyes lifted to Derek. I wanted to see if that was true. No one made a sound. Derek opened his mouth, closed it, then looked away. That tiny act, more than the fall itself, confirmed everything. Claire picked up her duffel bag from the edge of the mat, slipped on her plain white sneakers, and headed toward the front door with measured steps. She did not ask for applause. She did not wait for an apology. And as she reached the glass entrance, 20 students parted without being told, creating a silent path for the woman they had laughed at less than an hour before. The glass door closed softly behind Claire Bennett, but the silence she left inside Lawson Elite Jiu-Jitsu Academy lingered like a weight no one knew how to lift. For several moments, the students remained exactly where they were, standing in that parted aisle as if moving too quickly might erase what they had just witnessed. Derek Lawson stayed near the center mat, shoulders squared out of habit, yet somehow smaller than he had looked an hour earlier. The polished confidence he wore like a second uniform was gone. In its place stood a man confronted by the oldest humiliation in the world, being measured by the very standard he claimed to teach and coming up short. Ethan Parker was the first to speak, though his voice came out almost as a whisper. "Coach, was that really her?" Derek did not answer. He stared at the front door, jaw locked, watching the empty parking lot beyond the glass where Claire's aging silver sedan pulled away without hurry. No luxury car, no dramatic entourage, no social media reveal, just a simple woman leaving exactly the way she had arrived, carrying no need to prove anything further. And somehow that made the lesson cut deeper. Mason Cole exhaled slowly and rubbed the back of his neck. She was controlling every exchange, he said, more to himself than anyone else. Trevor Mills looked down at his own blue belt with an expression that had lost all earlier smugness. Around the room, students shifted uncomfortably, replaying every laugh, every whispered comment, every confident assumption they had made the second Claire stepped through the door. The medals on the wall suddenly seemed decorative rather than impressive. The Academy slogan printed above the mirror, "Humility through discipline," now read like an accusation. Derek finally turned, but he did not bark instructions. He did not explain. He did not spin the moment into a coaching opportunity. He simply looked at the faces surrounding him and saw something he had not expected to see in his own gym: disappointment. Not because he had been outperformed. Athletes understand losing. It was because they had watched him enjoy someone else's humiliation before earning the right to judge her. That was the stain no technical excuse could wash away. Derek inhaled, then walked to the front of the class with slow, deliberate steps. The students waited. His voice, when it came, was quieter than any of them had ever heard. Class dismissed. No one moved immediately. They had expected commands, analysis, maybe anger. Instead, they got 2 words and the sound of a man hearing himself for the first time. One by one, students began collecting water bottles and gym bags, but the usual post-training chatter never returned. Parents left in silence. The receptionist avoided eye contact. Mason bowed his head slightly toward the empty doorway before turning away. Ethan Parker remained by the wall, still staring at the place where Claire had stood, as though trying to memorize what humility had looked like when it finally entered the building. Derek was the last one left on the mat. He looked up at the framed tournament photographs, at his own smiling image in several of them, arms folded, chest out, the architect of a polished reputation. Then he looked down at the canvas where Claire Bennett had redirected him with almost effortless calm. In that fluorescent stillness, he understood something medals had never taught him. Rank can command a room, but character decides whether that room respects you when the commanding stops. Claire had arrived in a faded blue GI, old sneakers, and a quiet voice. She left with